priorities and our recent ETP 2014 results, which we will speak about in a few minutes. For those of you just joining or not familiar with our buildings work here at the IEA, I'm joined by my colleague Marc Lafrance, who is the head of our buildings unit here in our Energy Technology and Policy Division. And we will be joined by several panelists today who are buildings experts in the field and work with us at the IEA. Today's webinar series objective is to seek advice from key global building stakeholders in the development of the IEA's new initiative for sustainable buildings. The key focus of this partnership is to raise the importance of building energy efficiency among high-level energy policy directors, while also providing the fundamental analysis to support more investment from the public and private sectors. For those of you interested in finding out more about the webinar series, you can go to our webpage, www.iea.org. Under the newsroom and events on the top of the page, you can click and then find workshops. Under the workshop, there's information about today's workshop, including the agenda and information on the speakers. There's also information about tomorrow's workshop for those of you who are interested in joining. And this webinar will be taking place in early morning Central Eastern Time for our Pacific audience tomorrow. So to hand it over to my colleague Marc Lafrance, he will be speaking about the IEA's building activity and the overview of our partnership, as well as some of the results coming out of our Energy Technology Perspective series that was released 2 Mondays ago.
Okay, thank you, John. Well, welcome everyone to our first of our series of webinars for May and June. And this is Marc Lafrance. I'm glad that you've taken the time to participate in our webinar. For those of you, just so you know, you should have received emails with the speaker biographies as well as the detailed agenda. And we will also be, I also provided an evaluation form for the end of today's session. So if you have that, you may want to open that up alongside of the webinar or just keep it for the end. And we do want your feedback along the way. And later on, when we go through the question and answer period, there is a function to raise your hand and we will allow you to speak. And if you choose to rather put in a question via the text function, you can try that as well. We will try to get to all questions and answers, all questions to be able to answer them today. And if that's not possible, we'll certainly get back to you at the end of today. All right, so first of all, last year in 2013, the IEA, we were very productive in the buildings area. We put out 3 major publications. You can see them here, starting with the buildings book. And then my colleague Yamina Sahib put out the policy pathways for building codes. And at the end of the year, we put a comprehensive technology roadmap for building envelopes. So these core documents are really the basis for a lot of our recommendations moving forward, but just wanted everybody to be aware of these key publications. Okay, so my talk will include an overall background of the buildings activity. We'll also talk about what we see as the key areas for technology and policy. Today we won't have the time to go into all of these areas, obviously, but we touched base on 3 key elements. That's what the following speakers will talk about. And then we want to talk about how do we move forward from here, working with our partners and expanding the activity that we've done so far. We also will talk about our recent publications for the Energy Technology Perspectives 2014, and then our tracking report, and then, of course, what we plan on going from the next steps. Okay, so for most of you that have signed in today, you're probably working in the building sector. We all know that the building sector is a huge impact on the energy systems and the environment for carbon emissions. Here you can see some of the key metrics of why it has a major impact. Beyond the energy and environmental impact, it also is directly linked to GDP and economic activity. So while many countries around the world are struggling economically or trying to reduce the unemployment rates and increase their economic growth, revitalizing the building sector is a great way to do that. So, and a key thing here is that we're going to have 2.5 billion people added to the planet by 2050, and most of the existing stock in OECD will still be in place. So lots of key elements to address. This is the buildings publication. It lays out our overall strategy comprehensively of how we want to address the building sector. It includes very detailed global energy forecast, as well as 9 key regional areas. And it also includes 3 main technical chapters, one on building envelope, one on heating and cooling, including solar thermal, and then we have an appliance and lighting chapter and cooking, and then we have a very comprehensive policy chapter. So this slide just gives you the idea of the regions that we addressed for energy savings potential and the forecast. They're listed at the bottom of the screen so you can see them. Also, I should have mentioned that all of these presentations will be available on the web in a relatively short period of time, so you will be able to go back to refer to them. Okay, so I have a policy matrix that was from the buildings book that includes the 9 key regional areas, and it includes various elements for technology and policy. And we tried to address what are the top 2 critical areas that we should be pursuing in each region. Now, literally almost every element on this matrix could be pursued, but we want to say what are the key ones. And today, for example, heat pumps, which was a special analysis that we did in ETP 2014, is a key priority for the European Union. So we've asked Thomas Nowak to speak about that to help us how would we implement a much more aggressive policy for heat pumps in Europe. And then another, of course, the deep renovation is a critical element. We're not presenting that today. Our colleagues at the Global Buildings Performance Network and BPIE have done lots of work. We, of course, fully support that work, but we're not duplicating that type of presentation today. But we are talking about zero energy buildings, which is a key element that we've shown for Europe and the United States and North America. The last element that we talk a lot about is the appliance and equipment standards, and we have a presentation addressing that. And as you can see, many regions of the world, that's a critical priority to pursue. Okay, here's a policy representation of all of the key policies working together, integrated, so that we can drive the system forward. A typical implementation for all these policies and transforming the construction market is 20 to 30 years, if not even longer than that. We have technology that was introduced 40 years ago that's still not mainstream. But the whole idea of working aggressively with these policies together is how can we accelerate this time frame from R&D concept all the way through till we get to mandatory policies. And in some cases, with a very aggressive schedule, it's possible to do some of this within a 10 to 15-year time frame. Okay, so this just shows us of how we're trying to transform from very old, inefficient buildings to what we would consider to be advanced construction or building codes of more progressive regions of the world, such as Northern Europe and Northern North America. And then people are working on niche applications for zero energy buildings, but we have a long way to get there. The European Union is probably the most advanced in the world in this area, and that's where we're going to have Rod Johansson talk about this. So, but the key element is that even though people are working on zero energy buildings in emerging markets, it's really not ready to be cost effective and wide scale because we still don't have the fundamental availability and cost effectiveness of mature technologies, which we need to move that forward to get people to the advanced construction. And then in the more developed markets, we want to move to a zero energy building. So this is kind of a template for where we need to focus our attention. We have a very comprehensive building envelope roadmap. This includes assessments for advanced technologies for 12 regions of the world, along with the test procedure and rating mechanisms that are critical to support advanced materials. We also provided a policy criteria and evaluation. We did provide our own independent assessment, but we're really calling on individual countries and regions to do their own policy assessment so that they can manage where things move forward. We have given many presentations in this area over the last 3-4 months, and we will make sure that all of those presentations are linked to the webinar material webpage within the next few days or a week so you can get access to that, because we're not going to go into the detail today. Okay, this is our policy pathway for building codes, and it really lays forward how do we get to very low energy buildings, and beyond just the concept of achieving reductions in energy, it's how do we modify human behavior to adapt to lower consumption of energy. And it really lays out a footprint as to how do you drive the building codes to achieve zero energy building. Of course, this would be mostly applicable to more mature markets, but there's lots of fundamental elements in here that are applicable for anybody in building codes. So it's a very useful document. Okay, so now we have this is kind of a representation of how we see the IEA working with our stakeholders and our partners. This is a template for the core element of the IEA deals with our extensive energy balance database, along with our energy efficiency indicators database that we're developing with some of our more mature members. And of course, we're working with developing markets as well in trying to get more information. But we also work with a host of other entities that we partner with, that we want to help implement deployment. How do we enable deployment, I should say, but also ultimately how do we work collaboratively with them, with in-kind, and ultimately do we grow the buildings activity at the IEA where we would actually get financial support for various projects and activities like that. So this is kind of a framework for how we want to work with stakeholders. So I touched base on this a moment ago, but our core area is really the data and analysis. Our current buildings model has 31 countries and regions. We do it for the entire world, so we can provide very detailed assessments for different individual countries. Our model is basically a hybrid between an econometric model and a stock and flow model. We also have worked with a number of organizations, but we want to expand the people that we work with. And so anybody that's interested in working with us, please make sure you get a hold of us. We'll collaborate. And really, Webinar 4 is going to be dedicated pretty much strictly to building modeling, data and assumptions, peer review. So that'll be really a key element to look forward towards the end of June. Okay, and so the coming year, just so people know what we're working on at the IEA, this is stuff that is definitely going on as we speak and will continue. We're working to enhance our building model. We want to work a lot more on some of the key drivers for floor area, do sensitivity analysis, try to do more accurate assessments for regions of the world that haven't been done before. We're also going to, like I said, update our inputs, and then we're going to be looking at expanding our thermal model, do more robust deep renovation assessments where we do some sensitivity analysis and looking at various rates of renovation and levels of renovation, and try to get a more detailed approach for more countries of the world. And then we're working on a comprehensive buildings, energy demand, and building solutions for China with Tsinghua University. We expect that to be late this year for publication or potentially early next year. And we will be looking for peer reviewers along the way with this. And the last item is basically working on our partnership, developing relationships, working with people on mutual activities, and trying to prioritize potential future work. So that's where I come to this list that's not too long, but there's quite a few items on here. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail today because this is mostly the subject of Webinar 3. But what we want people to do is to look at this list, if not today after the webinar is completed, over the coming a few days, and give us your feedback as to if you think these are things that you have interest in or have high priority, please give us that feedback. Or if you think of new items you'd like to add to the list, or if you think certain items just aren't worthy of doing because you think it's being done by somebody else and it's not needed. Any feedback at all we would greatly appreciate. So the top one of some of the feedback we received from people on the Building Envelope Roadmap was that they think it's a very good document for a global perspective, but they'd like to see more implementation activity on a regional or on a country basis. And we see that as a good activity, although we would need to have a local entity that would work with us. And then also, when we start looking at Europe's policy for buildings, you know, there's not really a comprehensive activity to bringing everybody together. Could the IEA facilitate and help that along the way? The IEA has been doing a lot of work on multiple benefits, and it's across all of the sectors, but there's definitely a need for looking at job creation specific to the building sector that might be of some interest. And then our Energy Technology Perspectives 2015 document will be looking at innovation, and we could potentially do something more specific on buildings, although the time frame from now until when we'd have to go to a publication is fairly limited. So we may be able to work on a few technologies if we have partners that are really interested in working with us, but we have to be realistic to expect that it would have to be modest. It would not be comprehensive for an extensive list of innovative themes and ideas. Okay, and then the last one is working in emerging markets, and this is going to be the subject of tomorrow's webinar, so I won't go into more detail on that. Okay, so our ETP 2014 document that came out Monday basically lays out the, I'm sorry, it was last Monday, I guess, right? Let me make sure I get the weeks right. So anyway, so, but basically this has all of our core building analysis forecasts and savings scenarios for 4DS and for 2DS, but we also went beyond 2DS to try to see what could we additionally get out for energy savings through high electrification, which would be moving from shifting additional gas demand in Europe to reduce that further with the use of heat pumps. And in the case of China, it would be instead of growing the gas supply, avoid the growth in gas supply for higher electrification. We worked at the 11th Heat Pump Conference in Montreal. We gave a presentation. Actually, the chair of the implementing agreement on heat pump program presented for us, but that presentation is available with lots of details. So we're not going into that today. But what will happen with Thomas, who will follow me, he will talk about, okay, if we are going to try to promote heat pumps in Europe, okay, what are the key things we need to do? What's the status of heat pumps? So he's going to kind of tell us how do we implement these types of strategies. Okay, we also did the Clean Energy Tracking Report, which is available for free from this link that you see on the screen. And we have three major sections. One is along the lines of whole buildings, which we believe is not on track. Lots of work that's required still. We also have one on building envelope, which we don't think that's on track as well. And then we have one on appliances and equipment standards. And that one, we believe we made significant progress. Things are moving in the right direction, but we still need more activity, more funding. So there's a lot more to be done. But overall, when we look at buildings, we have a long way to go to achieve a 2DS scenario, and we're just not getting there unless we have more resources for the entire effort for buildings globally. Okay, so this shows a little more details on webinars 3 and 4. We now have selected the date for webinar 3, June 10th at 1:30. We're going to give a detailed presentation on our project plans with a lot more details on the topics I mentioned today, along with other elements that we received from people from this webinar and tomorrow's webinar. And then we also are going to have various organizations provide feedback and give us their response as to what they think about it, such as IPEAC and the End-Use Working Party, Vice Chair on Buildings will do that. And we also had a couple industry folks that have talked to us about being able to provide feedback. And so if anybody else is interested in serving that role, please contact me, and if we can fit you on the agenda, we certainly will. But it would be good to have additional perspectives, especially from different regions of the world. And the last one is going to be, like I said, this one dealing with modeling and peer review. We haven't set the date yet, but it's looking like the week of June 23rd is a very busy week in Brussels, potentially maybe the 23rd or the 25th, but we haven't set that yet. Okay, and so I'll leave this up for a second for information. You all have access to this thing. There's also additional resource for some other policy pathways and technology roadmaps that we've done for buildings. So there's the information. Thank you so much. And we will now take questions, and John will moderate the questions. We also, I should have mentioned that we have Cecilia Tam in the room, who's the head of our energy demand unit, and she's here as well to participate in the questions. So we have information on all of our biographies that you should have received, so you know all of the roles that we play. And so John, do you have any questions now, or what do you have?
Thanks. So for all of you listening and for those of you joining, you can raise questions in two ways. One is to raise your hand using the hand option on your GoToMeeting screen. You can also write in your questions if you would like, and we will answer these as they come in the time we have now before our next presentation. Please also note there will be time at the end of all the presentations to raise questions and write in if you would like. While waiting for anyone to raise their hand or send in a question, I'd just like to remind everyone that all the information about today's webinar, including the agenda and the speakers information, is available on the IEA webpage if you go under Newsroom and Events and then Workshop. All of the information presented as well in the last presentation, including the publications of our Transition to Sustainable Buildings book, as well as ETP 2014, are also available on the IEA webpage under Publications. The technology roadmaps that were presented, as well as the policy pathway series, are also available on the IEA webpage, and these are downloadable for free. So it looks like we have one comment coming in now that from Karsten Dittmar, who is a certified passive house planner in Germany, who is noting that due to the big influence on low to zero energy buildings, he doesn't see the topic of ventilation, and there is a need that we address this so that we have an airtight and good envelope. Mark, do you want to make a comment on this?
Yeah, sure. Well, thank you for the comment. Whenever anybody talks about ventilation, I mean, I think everybody knows that it automatically goes with air sealing. So the best way to design and construct and build a house and renovate a building is to ensure that it's highly sealed, and then that proper ventilation is added, a mechanical ventilation through a variety of strategies. And so in several of the presentations that I've been giving in Europe, mostly in Europe, I guess, so in China as well, over the last 3-4 months since we released the Building Envelope Roadmap, is that we're calling for much more effort on air sealing in buildings. For example, in Europe, we have the energy performance certificates that people are issuing on a mandatory basis, but very little number of them, or very few of them, are being measured for air leakage. So people are giving a performance metric for air infiltration on a building that's never been measured. They're just guessing at it based on the vintage of the building or something. So that is a consistent theme. It's in the Building Envelope Roadmap. We fully agree with you. But there's also the implementing agreement under the Energy in Buildings and Communities implementing agreement that is dedicated to this whole issue of ventilation. So yeah, that's a great topic, and there's a lot of people working on it, but we need to move it to the mandatory policy category where we get people ensuring that new buildings are constructed with air, very well sealed. So that was a text question, guys. It wasn't.
Yes, no one. No.
Yeah, because if somebody wants to speak and ask a question verbally, that's one of the reasons we're trying to test this out today, is to evaluate our ability to do that, because I guess I found in the past that some of these webinars tend to be a little bit sterile because you're getting questions coming in by the text feature, which is okay, but we'd much rather have people be able to become live, express their comments. So that's good. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Mark. We have another question coming in from Christian Borchardt, who's asking if you could clarify the IEA's role in the facilitation of the revised EPPD 2017 as indicated in your presentation.
Right. Okay. So at this point, this is basically just a topic that says well, first of all, we believe there's a need that somebody, or obviously various people working together, should be collaborating on some of the key elements of what's in the current directive, what's working correctly, what needs to be improved, and the question is can the IEA play a facilitation role in that? Can we assist in doing that, working with obviously with industry, with research organizations and advocates, and is that a role that the IEA could help play? In addition to the European experts, we think also by bringing in global experts, whether they be from Asia or North America, to participate in this type of activity, which is we'll consider it to be like one of the more proactive public policy activities for buildings in the world. We could bring in other people to help assist in doing that, and then provide a recommendation as to what we think needs to happen. So we haven't done any work in this area. It's a topic for discussion. If people think we could play that role, is there interest? But we would be glad to get your feedback on it. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Mark. And one last question before going to our next presentation. This is coming in from Douglas Johnson. On your working to improve collaboration slide, industry and manufacturers don't appear in the core circle for data and analysis. What do you see as the role of industry groups which have produced peer-reviewed data and analysis?
Okay, so that's a very good question. I think we looked at the core group of being the independent researchers that are looking at a variety of activities, and actually this issue was discussed internally whether or not we would see manufacturers being in the core group or not in the core group, and I think it certainly could move in that direction. I think I think I was the key person that decided to put it in the influential group, believing that the manufacturers have probably a more of an influential function than the core detailed analysis. At the same time, I'm aware of certain situations where industry has spent a lot of resources on doing their own modeling. So in that case, they're functioning inside that core group. So I think that's an item for discussion, and certainly this type of graphic can be revised. I guess it really comes down to how involved will the industry be and willing to work with us on a detailed level. And if that's the case and they're willing to do that, then we certainly would move them into the core group. For example, one of the things we've talked about would be if industry were able to support the assignment of a secondee here at the IEA for a year or two, where they could work with us, collaborate with us, and directly contribute. Obviously, if something like that would happen, we certainly would move them to the core group. But that's the type of thing that we would definitely welcome. But I think at this point in time, from the level of interactions we've seen, that's my personal perspective on where it stands. But we're certainly open, and we encourage your participation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right, so now as a transition between some of the things that Mark was talking about in his previous presentation on some of the work we've done within our existing buildings model, particularly for our energy technology perspectives 2014, looking at Europe and China as core regions for potential high electrification. This slides nicely into our next presentation coming from Thomas Nowak at the European Heat Pump Association. As Mark mentioned, we looked at the potential for heat pump technologies in Europe and China to really play a role in reducing gas demand or growth in gas demand, in the case in China. Thomas is joining us, as I mentioned, from the European Heat Pump Association as Secretary General, which has been his role since 2009 there. His responsibilities include lobbying and policy monitoring consulting at the European level, and he also has contributed to previous energy technology perspectives publications. He also is a board member of the European Technology Platform on Renewable Heating and Cooling. Thomas, if you can hear us now, we will give you control of the presentation, so you can begin.
All right. Yeah, I can hear you. Good afternoon, everybody. This is Thomas Nowak. I'm not exactly sure how I move the slides forward. I can control the mouse, but what do I do to
with the roller? Yeah, do you have the roller on the mouse?
Okay. Now it works perfect. Good. So let's start. Thanks for having us in the first place. I think the question is very interesting, how to bring heat pumps forward, and by that how to reduce the use of final energy, even primary energy, and also as a side effect reduce greenhouse gas emissions and produce jobs and create a secure and safe energy scenario. It's very interesting from the current perspective in the Ukraine, where an answer by our energy commissioner is we have difficulties in securing our gas supply, so let's look at new gas sources. And I was surprised because I thought let's look at other energy sources altogether, but that's not the conclusion of the Commission, so it's high time to present some recommendations on what to do. What I will do today is I will briefly introduce, does that work? I will briefly introduce the EHPA. No. Okay. So the European Heat Pump Association is representing only the heat pump industry, so we have a very clear, not distorted message. We don't have to take care of a lot of other technologies. We do this in Europe. We have 109 members from 22 countries from all parts of the value chain. and we are located in Brussels. We look at all energy sources, so air, water and ground, just to avoid a mistake, because sometimes people think we only look at air or at geothermal. And we look at heating, cooling and hot water for residential, commercial and industrial applications, with the last one getting increasingly important. I would like to start with a slide that we have taken from a Commission communication. It outlines how the 2030 framework should look like if we have a secure energy supply in the future, and they base it on 3 pillars: sustainability, security of energy supply and competitiveness. And I have ticked the boxes that heat pumps fulfill. And you can see that heat pumps do indeed reduce emissions, they do indeed reduce energy consumption, and they are an alternative energy source or they use an alternative energy source. They are also renewable. That's in Europe, that's clear. I'm stressing that because I just come back from a meeting with Chinese colleagues, and they say, no, in China the use of air is still not understood as using a renewable energy source. So there is some work ahead of us. The other points you can see, diversification, grid stability is getting increasingly interesting. I have sources that say if we increase the share of renewable electricity in the grid, we need storage, and heat pump systems can provide comparatively cheap storage. The only lacking point actually that we are still suffering from is affordability and competitive prices. Part of it is the result of a distorted market. There are still subsidies for fossil fuels in many countries, and in countries that use the feed-in tariff we have a problem that electricity is getting greener, but all electricity consumers, or at least the private ones, because industry is often excluded, have to bear the cost for that. And obviously it would be more in line with shifting the energy system if the cost would be borne by either all energy users or by the fossil fuels only. So you can see that heat pumps does all these things. Heat pumps in Europe are highly regulated. I will not explain all of this slide. This is sufficient to understand that heat pumps play an important role in European legislation on all levels. On the individual system side, on the building side, with regards to country targets, and also with regards to the 2020 targets, and they are under discussion now to play an even more important role for the 2030 climate and energy framework. So what we see then, and I think that's the biggest achievement, we have last year finalized the Ecodesign and the related energy label, and what this says is that it's, you can say it's official, heat pumps are best-in-class technology. So if any country wants to improve the energy efficiency in its area, then heat pumps are a very good choice, certainly taking into consideration that the building envelope must be prepared to handle it. So that's not impossible, but it's an important prerequisite. We were very happy about this. We thought this will give heat pumps a big boost, and while the regulation is in force now, it will only become mandatory end of next year, and we expect that industry will start to use the label on all products beginning of 2015, with the 2015 catalogs coming out. Simply for economic reasons, you don't want to print these catalogs twice when you have to label all products in September. This looks very nice. It shows the energy. You can probably see the mouse here. It shows the energy efficiency levels, and heat pumps will be in the upper levels, A+, A+, and even A++ from the start of the measure. You will have information on sound power, and you will have information on capacities across the different climate regions. The same label is used for fossil fuel burners, for micro CHP. In addition, a similar label will be used for biomass. Well, no, actually that's not true. That was not decided yet. So the important point is that the comparability between different energy sources is given. However, just as a short remark, the energy classes are not the same. This may be a bit of a confusing graph. The important message here is that the width of the energy efficiency classes differs widely. And what you can see there is that the improvement of a heat pump in an A+ class, let's say by 12 or 15 percentage points, happens entirely inside the class. Whereas if I improve an other system, a fossil system, from C to A, it's a two classes jump, and it looks much better. So you could say the student, the best in class, cannot show exactly what he or she can do. but I hope anyhow that this will be a small limitation of the breakthrough of heat pumps. Then I wanted to explain to you, if everything is so well, shouldn't then heat pumps have much stronger market penetration? And I brought some latest statistics. What I will present here is data from 15 out of 21 markets, because 6 markets are still missing, and we took a ceteris paribus approach. We just assumed that the markets would be stable where no additional data was available. That's quite realistic, because we see here that there is a small jump, a small increase from 2012 to 2013 of 2%. That's in line with industry expectations. People that I talked to say, indeed, the markets are recovering, and this recovery is continuing in 2014. You can see also that from 2005 to 2008 we had a very strong increase across Europe. Then there was a decline that was mainly caused by an increase in VAT in Germany and stopping of heat pump subsidies in France. Then we see another increase, but this increase from 2009 to 2010 is due only to the fact that we added 2 more markets. From 2009 to 2010 we added Poland and Spain. And then the list is complete. Then we have around 21 markets, and you see it's rather stable market development now starting to become better. If we talk about which energy source is mainly used, then you can see on this slide that there is a big trend towards air source. Geothermal systems have around 13 to 14% of market share. It's rather stable over the years. What doesn't show here is that the geothermal systems are getting much larger. So quite often when commercial applications are done, this is geothermal. We only count one system for that. So the sheer numbers are distorting a little bit the contribution of this technology. Then we look at the second trend, that's sanitary hot water heat pumps, also using air as energy source, but being a very important technology, because it's also an entry-level technology, and it's a technology that works in many countries, even when you don't want to replace the existing heating system. And that's part of the reason why they see such a strong increase. The major driver for this is France, where putting in a hot water air source heat pump into the house will make it easier to achieve the strong building standards, and that also shows that the building standards actually are a major key towards developing more heat pumps. The stricter energy requirements will be, the easier it will be to have heat pumps, and I second what Mr. Dittmar said, that the air forced ventilation will become increasingly interesting and necessary. And what we see is also that forced ventilation will increasingly be connected to heat pumps. Exhaust air heat pumps are gaining ground in our statistics, and the same will be for air heating with ventilation system. That's starting to become visible. I said a minute ago that, no, this is the wrong direction. I said a minute ago that large heat pumps are increasingly using geothermal. We don't have sufficient data for that. You can see here that around 80 to 90% of all the heat pumps are in a capacity range below 20 kilowatts, and the rest is above 20 kilowatts. But we don't have more information on that. Anecdotal evidence, however, shows that large heat pumps are increasingly popular and interesting. If we then briefly look at who is the winner in the race towards the number 1 market, then you can see that it's surprisingly for many not Sweden, but it's France, followed by Italy. And then there is Sweden, Germany, Norway, Finland, Spain, Denmark, Switzerland, and Austria. And Austria overcame the United Kingdom this year. The United Kingdom was number 10 last time. It's also remarkable that 90% of the sales happen in these 10 markets. So we see that the European market and the trends therein can be quite reliably and robust seen in these 10 markets, and the rest are following. Number 12, you can see here, Poland will, I think, move very quickly up here, because Poland is one of the few markets that has double-digit growth for a long time. In order to leave some time for questions, I will conclude here with 2 slides, in fact. The one conclusion that I have here is that it becomes obvious that in Europe it's accepted that heat pumps do provide renewable energy for heating, cooling, and hot water, and they do that efficiently. They are available, solutions are available for residential, commercial, and industrial applications in nearly every temperature range. I'm just coming back from the Montreal conference that Mark has mentioned, and it became absolutely obvious that there is a lot of research work happening in the industrial segment, where also process heat is starting to be tackled. So lifting energy from 60 to 90 degrees, lifting energy even up to 120. Latest developments show the possibility of going up to 170 degrees with low pressure steam. So there's a lot of dynamics in that segment, maybe even more than in the residential segment. Most alarming for me, also in my function as representative of the industry, is that despite there is a strong match with the EU climate and energy targets, there is not a clear recognition of heat pumps across the different member states. Sorry, I used the abbreviation. I hope you understand. MS stands for member states here. And that means clearly that we have to do more work. More work has to be done by the Commission. It was mentioned that data situation should be updated. I agree to that fully. The PRIMES model that the Commission uses is not prepared to handle decentral energy production, let alone heating. Heating is overlooked altogether, and we make it as a key priority. But if you say what should we do, our requirements as industry towards the Commission is we need to get rid of the distorted cost situation for energy sources. It's not acceptable that at the moment fossil fuels should be faded out and still there are subsidies given. It's very difficult to understand that in areas where feed-in tariffs are given for electricity, all the electricity users have to pay for that instead of distributing these costs to the fossil fuels. And probably the most easy to implement and fastest working solution is tax returns, that also discussed by some member states. Or we follow good examples like Denmark, where the cost for the electricity tax was just reduced by approximately 4 euro cents, or Italy, where the electricity tariff has just been adjusted by a government law, and now the average cost for electricity for heat pumps is reduced from 31 cents to 21 cents, so a reduction of 33%. That should certainly boost the heat pump market, or even better and more drastic. You have said what drastic requirements would we want. We can look at Denmark. Denmark has banned the use of oil and gas in new buildings, so you cannot install a fossil fuel boiler in new buildings anymore since 1st of January from 2013. I would even say this should be extended to deep renovation projects in the long run. So you see that these demands are quite drastic, but it will be necessary to take swift and drastic action to bring heat pumps forward also from the policy level. I'm available for further questions, but with this I conclude and thank you for your attention.
Okay, thanks, Thomas. If you can stay on a line for a minute, we'll open the floor again for some questions. Again, for those of you joining, you can ask questions either by raising your hand, and then we can call on you to vocally voice your questions, or you can also write them in. It looks like we have a question that's already come in from Ian Meredith. It says that you've mentioned there's a price barrier still. Is this especially true for retrofits versus new houses or buildings? And if so, what do you recommend to overcome this constraint?
Yeah, it's indeed true. The price barrier exists. It's probably more prevalent for residential applications because industry operates under different conditions, and also the return on investment requirements are different, and service offerings are different. And you also have to see that all the markets are not the same. So there is no European market, even though it looks like that. The price, if I take the German example, in Germany, electricity has the burden of 60 to 80%, I'm not exactly sure, different numbers differ a little bit, of taxes and levies on top of the cost of production. And around, if I recall that correctly, 25% are from the feed-in tariff, from the distribution of the feed-in tariff that is paid to people that invest in clean energy solutions. And this feed-in tariff, the whole burden of the feed-in tariff is paid by all electricity users with the exemption of some large commercial and industrial enterprises. And from our perspective, that's completely unacceptable, because it means that a technology that is completely in line with the energy and climate targets gets a specific additional burden. And if you want a very simple solution, but politically nearly unimaginable to execute, it would be to free heat pump electricity from this additional burden. As an interim solution, one could say, well, if the heat pump uses green electricity, maybe then it should be exempt from this additional burden. And even further reaching variation of this would be to integrate the whole heating sector into the ETS, but of course that requires that the ETS is brought, the emission trading system is brought to work in the first place. From the concept perspective, it does work, but those of you that follow the European marketplace know that the prices for emission rights are at the bottom of all times at the moment. So that should, if there would be a proper price for emission, for emitting CO2 equivalents, then integrating heating into this would be a good solution.
Okay, great. Thanks, Thomas. We have one more question coming in from Christian Borchardt again. The question is from South Africa, taking this slightly larger than a building scale, but something that certainly is appropriate for buildings. Christian asks, how suitable do you deem heat pumps in the larger industry sector, for example 1 to 5 megawatts as an energy efficient alternative to cogeneration, especially in countries where gas is not available or if the market is electricity dominated? Before you answer this, Christian, I'd just like to say something regarding our buildings work here, our buildings and industry work. Since this touches on this topic, we will be launching a new publication linking heat and electricity systems, focusing on CHP and district heating and cooling, efficient district heating and cooling solutions on June 5th. If you would like more information about this, you can visit our IEA webpage or email Mark or myself. And with that, Christian, maybe you want to give a response on how appropriate heat pump technology is for larger applications and electricity-dominated markets.
Under those two conditions, it's a perfect solution. Not more to be said. I can provide data on this and examples, but it's a perfect solution.
Okay, and this is Mark LaFrance. I just wanted to add a couple quick comments. One is Thomas, I really appreciate your presentation, and when you showed the slide on the sales for heat pump water heaters in Europe in 2013, we had a nice increase. And so for anybody that has seen some of my recent presentations where I've been talking about Europe having 1/40th of the per capita penetration for heat pump water heaters compared to Japan, now it's maybe 1/30th, okay, or 1/35. So we're still moving in the right direction, but compared to Japan, that has very high energy prices, and you know, they basically don't have a domestic resource, same as Europe, a lot of domestic gas resources. We still can do so much more in heat pump water heaters for Europe. But anyway, at least the encouraging thing is from today, you've shown a nice trend in 2013, and if we were to kind of continue with these growth rates, it would be very good. And the one last thing is that Helsinki Energy, in one of the presentations, they have a very, very large heat pump application, one of the largest in the world, where they're utilizing the heat from their wastewater, and this is a huge scale for district heating. So there are applications in the world where people are using large-scale heat pumps. Okay, thank you, John.
Okay, thank you, Thomas. All right, so we'll move to our next presentation now on nearly zero energy buildings. We're joined by Rob Jansen, who's an energy efficiency expert, having worked with various governmental, international, and non-governmental agencies, also including the International Agency a while back. Rod's work is involved in European-wide energy efficiency and renewable energy policy analysis, and he also has been working on nearly zero energy buildings for the Energy Efficiency Directorate of the European Council on Energy Efficient Economy. And with that, Rob, I'll hand the floor over to you.
Thanks, John. Yes, I'm with the European Council for Energy Efficient Economy, which is Europe's largest NGO that is dedicated to energy efficiency. And I was representing the ECEEE in Brussels when the whole Energy Performance in Buildings Directive was recast, and so during the whole negotiations period. So the nearly zero energy buildings part was quite an integral part of it. I will take quite a different approach to what happened in the last presentation, because I mean everybody who's online, I would assume, knows that the EU has embarked on quite an ambitious effort to go to nearly zero energy buildings. It's an obligation. So what we're going to do is try to just tell a story about where we are and where we're going. So let's just go to, oh, my finger doesn't work. Okay, first of all, well, just to give a quick policy foundation, a little look at the policy foundation, look at some of the definitions and principles very quickly, because what I'll do is I'll give you at the end something for some home reading that you can do on your own to sort of help you. We'll look at some of the policy progress, how the member states are implementing it, what's next, and if you want to follow the progress, some of the work that the IEA is doing. Now look at, there's a lot of interest in nearly zero energy buildings. Some people call it zero energy buildings. We've got a whole bunch of definitions. We've got a whole number of names. One member country calls it zero carbon buildings. We look at passive houses. We look at positive energy buildings. We look at residential buildings, commercial and public buildings. So it's got quite a the one thing I didn't put in here is the fact that it can be for either new build or for renovation as well. So it can go both ways. Although the buildings directive is basically was looking at new build primarily. But I should say, going back to the lot of interest, is that being with the European Council for Energy Efficient Economy, we have a summer study every 2 years. And last year we had 5 peer-reviewed papers that were dedicated to nearly zero energy buildings. And there's also 12 intelligent energy efficiency projects that are funded by the European Commission that are related to nearly zero energy buildings. So there's a lot of interest in a variety of ways. The policy foundation, as I said, goes back to the recast of the Buildings Directive in 2010. It recast the original directive that goes back to 2002. Now, this whole thing for nearly zero energy buildings was a brand new concept. But Article 9, now remember, this was approved in 2010. It said that by 2019, all new buildings for public buildings had to be nearly zero energy buildings. And for all buildings, whether it's residential, commercial, or whatever, by the end of 2020. So it's an incredibly short period of time to have to do this sort of effort where we were sort of going blindly into this in a way. Now, Article 2 of the directives describes, let's just look at the definition. It gives a definition. As buildings that have a very high energy performance with nearly zero or very low energy use required to a very significant extent to be covered by energy from renewable sources, including from renewable energy produced on-site and nearby. Now that opens a can of worms, and 27 member states, now 28, have, as I said, been given a lot of flexibility how to define it, but they've been asked to define it. And what's happened is that the member states were also required to report their progress, and I'll get onto that in a second. Also, the Buildings Performance Institute Europe developed principles for helping member states define it, and I'll just show them to you in the next slide. But also there was guidance given by the European Commission by work done by the consulting company Ecodesign. So there was help to help member states to do this. Now, we have three principles that look at all of this thing. I won't go through this. This is in the time we've got. It doesn't make any sense at all. But you look at with the Tres Energetica, where you start with reducing energy needs first. You use renewables, and then you use less fossil fuels but efficiently. And then you also have an EPBD, nearly zero energy buildings, and climate goals. And then you look at the different proposals that the BPIE have. Now, I'll give you at the end how you can access some of this information. What we have here is that the timeline, you probably can't read it here. When you download the presentation, you'll be able to see it. But it gives a very strict timeline from 2010 until the actual implementation of what member states have to do and the elements that go into it to provide as much guidance as possible. Some of our member states have a lot of capacity. They've got a lot of building institutes. They've got ministries, different ministries. the ministry responsible for buildings or for energy or for environment looking at it, and other member states have a lot less. And so this directive was one of the first directives where the Commission and the Joint Research Center on behalf of the Commission play a much more active role in working with member states to try and systematically and logically try to work on this whole area. So this is just to give you an idea. This actually comes from a report from the Buildings Performance Institute, and you'll actually, and it's also in a report that the ECEEE did on nearly zero energy buildings, which I'll explain in a few minutes. Now, well, implementation progress. The Commission was required to provide an evaluation report by the end of 2012. It didn't. And at the time, and it didn't actually have something prepared and made public until the autumn of 2013, which it never even put on its website. I think they were quite shocked at how few member states actually reported in. And so what's happened now, I think there's 14 or 16 member states have actually now reported, given some influence or some other ideas. One of the important things, though, is that it shows in some of the reports that have come in is that the effort a lot of member states have done to bring stakeholders together to actually try and work on a common definition that makes sense to that member state. So, and some of them had numerical indicators, others didn't. Some of them defined a minimum requirement for renewable energy, but most of them didn't. So only 15 of the 27, this is before Croatia came in, had intermediary goals. And only 3 of them set intermediary goals for refurbishment. So you see, when Mark mentioned earlier about the IEA possibly get involved in terms of the future of the EPBD, whether that happens or not, I think there's a need for a lot more discussion and work for sharing best practice and discussing some of these issues. So what's next? In June next month, member states are having to publish their 3rd National Energy Efficiency Action Plan. Now that's related to the Energy Efficiency Directive, but it's quite possible that it will give an indication of where member states are going for 2020 to meet its 2020 target, and it quite possibly will give some indication of what the actual impact of the implementation of near zero energy buildings will be. Now remember, these buildings are not expected till after the 2020, but we probably will be getting more and more indication as time goes on. Now my time is almost up. I just want to show you, if you want to follow the progress. In April, the ECEEE wrote a report called Through Our Steering Through the Maze series to explain it. We originally did the first version of this in 2011, where we actually looked at how different countries, whether it was the United States or other countries, defined it, how they were using the concept. In this case, we really tried to see what was going on in Europe and how it was updated. It basically gave a lot more detail of what I've just said. That report will be updated regularly as we have more information. You can also, as you'll see, you can go to the ECEEE website and you'll find our document and you'll see information as it's happening. The important thing is that this has to be seen as the beginning of a process. This is not the end. Even 2019, a lot of member states will probably be struggling to get these nearly zero energy buildings out. Will they have all of their buildings be nearly zero energy? Probably not. So there's an incredible amount of work to do. This is a progress what am I saying?
Process in progress.
Process in progress. Well, that's a tough word to use. But anyway, I think that with you who are online who want to participate in it and some of the work that's going on, I think that it's actually quite an exciting process that's going on. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Ron. We have a couple of questions that have come in. It looks like we have one from Richard Barron who's asking, why are countries lagging so far behind? Are there specific barriers such as definitional work, skills in the building sector? Is it a cost issue? Is it a promotion issue?
This is an incredibly difficult thing. There is a definition problem. I think there's an awareness problem as well. I think that I had to speak in Madrid to some developers. And I mean, in Spain, these are some of the biggest developers in the country. And they weren't even aware of those deadlines of 2019 and 2021. And they said, you know, when we do our big developments, those take years to do in advance. And they weren't that aware of the things. Cost, I think, is less of a problem. The definition issue is, I think, in terms of the upscaling of skills, whether it be for architects, whether it's for the builders, whether it's the whole supply chain, I think there's a real problem there, and I think a lot more has to happen. So there's no one simple reason why it's not happening so well.
Okay, thanks. For those of you just joining, please note that you can raise your hand by clicking on the hand tab to verbally ask a question or also send them in written. Also note that after all the presentations we will have some time for comments and additional questions if we don't address them now. We have an additional question coming in from Ian Meredith on a very similar topic, perhaps something that the IEA can help contribute to with ECEEE and GBPN. He's saying, does the plethora of individual definitions for near zero or net zero lead to confusion between players? Essentially, should we have a harmonization of the definition?
In some ways, yes and no. The thing is, I think it will happen. I think what had to happen was that in terms of the first round, where member states had to send in their basically their plans, it gave the Commission and all of the people like the ECEEE or the Buildings Performance Institute or the GBPN, they got to see what was actually going on at the member state level. And what was the thinking behind it. And to be honest, a lot of thinking has gone on it. A lot of the member states have really brought together, trying to get consensus within a country. When this was being negotiated in the first place, you know, we already had one outlier because the UK had already, they wanted to put the focus on carbon as opposed to energy. And so that already made it difficult to even get even when the recast was being negotiated, how that was going to be dealt with. Also, I think that, to be fair, I think there was a need to sort of see what innovative ideas were out there. I mean, they thought this was in 2010, and this was negotiated in 2009, 2008. And the first implementation was going to be about 11, 12 years later. I mean, full implementation. Obviously, there's a phased-in approach. So I think there was a real need to let member states take a first crack at it and to really sort of see where they were thinking. I think now that we've actually seen the results, and we haven't seen the results from all of them, I think the Commission will probably come down a little harder to try and find a more harmonized approach. I don't think there's any doubt about that.
Thanks. Two similar questions about speeding up this standardization of the NZEB or ZEB definition. One is from Stefan van der Staden, who is asking, can SEN standardization help to speed up NZEB alignment? And similarly from our participant, Thomas Noack, what is the status of NZEB definitions in the member states today?
Okay. CEN is playing a big role in the whole recast of the building directive, and I can't remember. There was a big effort after the first EPBD. I think there were something like 30 to 33 CEN standards that were being developed or revised. This similar work is going on for the second, for this recast. Some of them are related to cost optimality. Some are related to the nearly zero energy buildings. Have a look at, as I mentioned, the report that ECEEE did. It gives a very similar, a simple overview, but I think that'll give you some indication of where it's going. Will it speed it up? I don't know. I mean, the thing is that it will help. And so will it light a firecracker under some member states? I don't know. The one thing I didn't mention is that member states actually meet on their own through a group called Concerted Action. So this is an internal group. This is not made public. Some of the results are they will bring outside experts in to talk to them. I know that some of them in that group are quite depressed at the level of ambition, but then, you know, a lot of us are in the buildings community and nothing can happen fast enough. We do have to look at the priorities that member states have on the energy efficiency as a whole, energy policy as a whole, or climate policy. And I think that going back to an earlier question in terms of the priority given, I think that even within our climate policies, I think energy efficiency doesn't get enough of attention. And I mean, I attended 6 or 7 of the COPs, and energy efficiency was barely mentioned. It's mentioned a lot more now, and I think that but I think the priority for energy efficiency, and then within that, the priority for buildings within energy efficiency has to increase. And as Mark gave a very good overview at the beginning of the potential, and I'm not sure if people just don't believe this potential. The other thing going on in terms of just Europe is that the highest priority has to be for existing buildings. We're adding less than 1% to our building stock every year. And I don't know if that's also affecting the priority that a lot of member states are giving. I simply don't know. I think it has to have an effect, but how much it is, I'm not sure there's enough evidence one way or the other.
Okay, yeah, thank you, Rod. This is Mark Lopez. I'm just going to add a quick comment. So this last point you mentioned about renovation, obviously if Europe can get to a point where they have cost-effective, market-viable, zero energy or nearly zero energy buildings, then that would lead to a lot of component technologies that would also feed into the renovation market. And so there is some synergy there. I think for me, because I actually worked in the U.S. for most of my career in building technologies. When I see the policy in Europe, I mean, it's very visionary. It's heading in the right direction, and it's great. But I also have to say to myself, what's the likelihood of it being successful? And I mean, today, if we don't even have the percentage of buildings that meet this criteria, let's say, like, we know that, let's say, for example, Austria has had one of the more aggressive passive house programs, and but percentage-wise, if we look at the total number of passive houses that have been built, which even though they've been successful, relative to the total housing starts, it's still a very small percentage. And so the question is, all right, so how can we define what nearly zero energy is with and without, let's say, PV, renewable energy, and then are we seeing 1%, 2%, 5% construction? I mean, for us to get to 100% construction when we're not even at 5 or 10% today, it's going to be so. But I think we all need to work together, and if the IEA can play a role in that, then we'll be glad to work with everybody. But anyway, thank you, Rod. I think you did a great job of trying to explain how all these pieces are moving forward, and we have to constantly keep looking at it. So,
okay, great. Thanks. Our next speaker is Michael McNeil, who's joining us from Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratories. Michael is the acting deputy group leader of the of the International Energy Studies Group. His work at LBNL has included analysis of environmental and financial impacts of U.S. federal efficiency policies, as well as energy efficiency policies beyond the U.S. Currently, under the International Energy Studies Group, Michael is looking at analysis of energy efficiency standards and labeling and the potential for energy efficiency globally. This includes the development of the bottom-up energy analysis system, which is BONUS, for those of you who may be familiar with it. He also supervises the development of LBNL's Policy Analysis Modeling System, or PAMS, which is a spreadsheet tool for analysis of cost effectiveness and national impacts of appliance efficiency programs. So with that, I will give you the floor, Michael.
Okay, thanks very much for that introduction. In addition, I would note that in this presentation I'll be making a presentation of some of the work of the Super Efficient Appliance Deployment Initiative. So this is under the SEED umbrella, and I'll get to a little bit of what SEED is about for people who aren't familiar with it. But changing gears a little bit from the last presentations, this presentation is really about data and analysis. I assume that I don't have to do too much work to convince people in this audience about the importance of data and analysis. Certainly, after spending several days at IEA, there's nothing else talked about except for the need for data, probably more than analysis even. But I wanted to sort of be specific in the way we talk about data and analysis and talk about some specific data sets. I should state at the outset that this is a talk about appliances, but I hope that this type of data, these type of data sets and analyses are not unique to appliances, but are applicable, can be broadened to the building sector as a whole. So what I want to try to do here is, first of all, lay out how detailed and robust data and analysis strengthen initiatives seeking to accelerate progress on equipment efficiency, and outline, kind of think through and outline what are some of the key elements of those, and talk about, at least in the appliance sector, what's been done in those areas historically, where we are right now, and I think most importantly, what we would like to do and what are the opportunities for doing that. Finally, I want to focus a little bit on an example from the SEED where data and analysis has been used to articulate progress and gaps on a global scale. So on that note, that's a good segue into the general description of what SEED is. SEED is a multinational government collaboration whose primary objective is to accelerate global market transformation for energy-efficient products. So SEED is an initiative under Clean Energy Ministerial and a task of the International Partnership for Energy Efficiency Cooperation, or IPEC. So I would add that SEED by now is not certainly not the unique international initiative to focus on energy efficiency, and specifically to focus on to include appliance efficiency. The data and analysis that we've needed and used for SEED, I think, have applications elsewhere, and that's sort of the point of bringing this to this group. A couple of highlights. We have the flags of all the participating governments here. They are a lot of the biggest economies. China is an observer, so that means that since China is not a full participant, we're not doing as much data analysis for China, and that's a big gap, which I'll cover a little bit later. You see on the right side of this slide kind of a headline that we use in SEED to as the most general, highest level kind of statement we want to make about appliance efficiency. That is, that measures taken by SEED partners since its launch in 2010 could save 700 terawatt hours of electricity per year by 2030. and that's equivalent to roughly 233 mid-sized coal-fired power plants. We use that statistic or that result to try to generate enthusiasm about energy efficiency, but it kind of points out that how do we know that? We know that because of a pretty fairly detailed set of data and analysis that we've been able to gather through the course of the project from the participating countries. I don't have a lot of slides, but I would like to spend a little time on this one. I've put together tried to match two sets of boxes here. On the left, the data analysis element, and on the right, what I call international initiative goals, which can be made a little more generic and have overlap with just national goals or goals of any jurisdiction, in fact, but I've framed them specifically in terms of international efforts to sort of raise the bar or increase the efficiency of appliances in order to reduce energy demand globally, like putting it into the global context. And if you think about it, there's really only three things you can do if you want to increase the global savings of appliances. You can either increase the product scope, that is, cover more different kinds of appliances. You can increase the per product impact, which generally means, set a more stringent standard or be more aggressive in the individual efficiency target, or you can just increase the number of countries that actually have programs. All of these things are important, and I would say roughly the same, equal in importance. There's certainly room to grow in each of these areas, depending on the part of the world you're talking about. So on the left side, the three elements that we've identified as being particularly important to impact these are a policy database, number one. Number two is an impact analysis. Number three is market data. So I've drawn the lines here to connect one to the other, and I'd just like to go through them briefly, each one. So a policy database can help identify frontiers of product coverage, therefore increasing product scope. An example of this is that the U.S., the EU, Japan, and China are all sort of in the process right now of greatly expanding the scope of product coverage, going into office products, consumer electronics, commercial buildings equipment, and industrial equipment that were traditionally have not been covered. And just the activity schedules of these countries can often be the first notice of technical specifications for new products that can be replicated in other economies. Second, when an impacts analysis does, one thing is that it identifies the gaps and potential. So if I'm doing an impacts analysis for the EU, for example, that tells us a lot about really what are the heavy hitters in terms of savings for different technologies, and that can influence the priorities of other countries. Prioritization and benchmarking, prospective program-wide impacts analysis gives a first indication of high-impact products to countries starting programs and demonstrates the dependence on product stringency. So what I mean by that is just a couple of examples. We recently did a small study on potential of Chinese energy efficiency, and we concentrated just on air conditioning and heat pump water heaters. And the point there was to show that if you really went very deep in those areas and got massive, very high efficiency improvements for just those two products, it could be significant and comparable to the 30 or 50 or so standards that China now has on products that have much smaller footprint. The other example is in South Africa, we did an analysis of their whole appliance sector to sort of help them prioritize. Impact analysis helps demonstrate program value. Retrospective analysis is a key indicator of programs, but it's not always done. I'll just kind of go through these as fast as I can here because I see I'm running short of time. Accelerating market data can help accelerate improvement through an observation of how quickly a market responds to the standards and labels. And finally, sort of a new idea is that you could potentially shortcut the certification process in low-resource countries by collecting alternative collection of market data, so that they don't have to develop the same testing capability and certification processes that the larger economies do. Now to go through these three different elements of data analysis. First, the first one I mentioned was a policy database. This has been done in the past. Most recently, the graphic here shows the result of a study done in Australia for the Australian Department of Industry, and it shows the number of regulations for appliances in each region. And you can see these numbers are quite large, over 2,000 in the European Union. So there's been quite a proliferation of regulations, and it's important just to enumerate them, and that's what's been done here. The challenge here is keeping this up to date and having a regular and systematic update of the database. Some people who are familiar with the Appliance Standards Program will be familiar with the Class SNL database, which has a similar purpose in a convenient, searchable form, which should incorporate this more recent data. Within SEED, we've collected a detailed activity schedule from SEED member countries, which includes not only what the standards and their implementation dates, but what's in the works planning-wise. The big gap there is China, which we would like to add and update. And then finally, I included the policies and measures database here at IEA, which includes both energy efficiency and renewable energy policies. It's a little bit broader, I would say, but one thing that might be really a positive thing is to incorporate some of these details from the appliance sector. Element number 2, stringency and impact analysis helps prioritize and track progress. So here's an example of the impact analysis that we've done through SEED. So we've included all SEED countries. As I mentioned before, China is not included, but this is what we think are the impacts, the CO2 mitigation impacts for standards already passed. So the standards have been passed, but they will continue to have impacts through 2020 and 2030. Just some highlights of what this shows us. You can already see some trends here. Despite the fact that residential electricity is kind of the oldest, most traditional area here, it is still the largest category in terms of savings in OECD countries. So that savings potential is not exhausted. Most of the progress in the last 4 years has been in OECD countries, of the countries we tracked. But again, we're not including China, which has been extremely active. So we're missing that data point. There are no commercial building equipment standards in non-OECD countries, at least not in the last few years. So that is something that has happened a lot in the EU and the US, but hasn't really reached the non-OECD countries yet. On the other hand, in the OECD countries, those savings are approaching the same amount of savings as in the residential sector. Finally, even though we include gas products, and there have been some very large fuel equipment standards, notably the heating equipment standards in the EU, the CO2 savings is still dominated by electricity. The next slide, just a slight digression about what the value of this type of impact analysis can be. In addition to looking backwards at the impacts of standards already passed, we also look forward to what our estimation of the potential. I won't go into detail about how we define our scenario. There's many ways to do this, and it's a subject for an entire webinar. But just to say that what we find, what we compared these potential results to the recent IEA World Energy Outlook 442 report and found that basically the bottom line is that the recent standards that we can observe are making progress but not nearly getting to the levels that we need to address climate change, but there's quite a lot of additional potential there, and enough, if you did everything that we think is feasible, you could get into that range of what we need to do. Second to last slide, the element number 3, which is market tracking, enables benchmarking, lowers capacity barriers, and promotes policy innovation. This is generally a challenge to get this type of data, so I want to report on some recent progress in this area and some opportunities. On the left, you see analysis provided by the IEA 4E Mapping and Benchmarking Annex, which unfortunately will not continue to update this data set. But you can see this provides a detailed comparison of the efficiency improvement of refrigerators in several economies. It's a very clear and powerful analysis, and took quite a lot of work and volunteering of data from member countries, and processing and conversion of test procedure algorithms and things like that. But it's quite a powerful type of result. There are many challenges with it, but opportunities we'd like to highlight here are, one, test procedure conversion algorithms that are needed to compare these two things are becoming more sophisticated. There's a possibility of pooling resources from different organizations to purchase market research data sets that could sort of replace this or add to this. And finally, there's an emerging area of internet-based data, which goes under the name web scraping, which is not quite accurate in some cases, but basically gives the idea that you would collect tons of data from retail websites in a way that is probably less accurate than what you see here in some ways, but is much more plentiful. So that's something that we see as a potential useful source. Finally, to wrap up the conclusions and recommendations, one conclusion is what sort of the title of the whole presentation is that data analysis provide value to international initiatives. But I would break this down into sort of two directions. One is, for the initiative itself, it helps to set priorities and focus for resource allocation. But those initiatives ultimately have to convince national governments to take action, so it has an outward aspect as well. Second, recent work by various parties has established valuable elements of the global resource, but these elements need to be made comprehensive and kept up to date. So I see that as an effort of coordination, which leads to the last point, which is individual countries as well as multiple international initiatives have common needs for data and analysis, so we should be pursuing economies of scale and reducing redundancy by coordinating efforts. And that's all.
Thanks. Yeah, I definitely agree on this last point. A lot of repetition and data collection. With that, we have time for a couple of questions before we move on to our next discussion about general activities in the building sector here at the IEA. It looks like I have two questions in now. One is coming from Abdul Fawad. You mentioned in your presentation that some of the potential savings from the work that's happened in seed member countries. This might be more appropriate for you, Mark, but it's asking what energy efficiency potential is in the buildings market, and how much can we conserve by constructing energy efficient buildings.
So, well, just to cover, maybe half of the building savings potential, which is the actual equipment. We've done several, studies, and I guess to summarize it, the savings potential is quite significant compared to what we need to do to address climate change, and it's sort of a ongoing sort of renewable resource. That's not the worst thing to say, but in the sense that whatever we say the potential is right now, if we set standards and achieve that, 5 to 10 years from now, there will be improvements in technology that makes the more potential.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Thanks, John and Michael. Yeah, I would just add that for buildings overall, our ETP 2014 publication that just came out, basically predicts about 50 exajoules by 2050. For those of you from North America that might use quads, a quad and an exajoule is pretty close for the sake of argument. But the other thing is we look at it on an individual basis. So, the existing stock of old buildings that are using lots and lots of energy for heating, which is where the biggest demand is, we can reduce heating loads in Northern Europe, Northern North America, China, Russia, on the orders of 75 to 80% of the heating load in a building with a combination of advanced building envelope and advanced mechanical equipment. But obviously, the big advantage of appliance and equipment standards is that, all of this equipment dies, right? It never lasts forever. And so if you have a regulatory program, they have to purchase the high-performance product if that's all that's being manufactured due to regulation. So it's kind of guaranteed you're going to get those savings if you put that in place. Now, but if you never do the improvements to the envelope, then of course you're always going to have higher consumption. But we would advocate for a systems approach where you improve the envelope, building envelope, reduce the thermal load, so now you put in a much smaller capacity unit. When we look to the hot developing countries where all of the new construction is going to take place, we certainly want to put in advanced building envelope measures. So many people may never even need to add an air conditioner. They'll be happy with reduced temperature. But if they do put in an air conditioner, then it can be much more efficient. So there's lots of details on all these elements in some of the the publications the IEA has done, as well as the people that have spoken today. So thank you.
And this last question is coming from Douglas Johnson, asking us to clarify your point about consumer electronics not being traditionally covered in energy efficiency policy. He mentions that the Energy Star program has been the policy of choice for consumer electronics in the U.S. for the past 10 to 20 years, depending on the product category, of course. Can you clarify what you mean by not being included under energy efficiency policy?
Yeah, I can clarify it by saying that something I should have mentioned at the outset. We're actually tracking minimum energy performance standards, and part of the reason for that is just concreteness. It's a little easier to track. So that you're absolutely right that Energy Star has been covering electronics for a long time. We don't cover it because it's not a minimum standard. So I apologize for that.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll move for the sake of time. We'll move now to the general discussion about IEA building activities.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you, everybody. This is more of a wrap-up session and an interaction session. We just so everybody knows, we did go through this extra effort of getting a webinar capability of being for attendees being able to speak. So please, if somebody out there wants to just test my system and raise your hand, because I would like to know that it actually works. But anyway, if you don't feel comfortable with that function and you'd rather put in text questions, that's fine. So, today we obviously had the webinar that included an overview from the IEA. We went through some details on heat pumps in Europe. We also have a lot more information about what we did for the special analysis for ETP. And we talked about zero energy buildings, which is a critical policy moving forward, and then appliance standards and activities for labeling to really drive the equipment market. Now, these are 3 important areas. They're certainly not all of the areas that we recommend and we promote. One of the things we did mention was the deep renovation of buildings is a critical element. We know a lot of other organizations that work in this area. Potentially we could have a future activity just on that alone because it's so important. So and tomorrow, we're going to be talking about mostly emerging markets. How do we get investment in emerging markets? How do we transition to high-performance buildings when we know that's where most of the new construction is going to occur over the next 20 years? If we don't get that correct, we're going to have a huge lost opportunity. So for those of you that might be in North America and you do enjoy your sleep, we know that you won't be able to participate tomorrow possibly, but certainly the material will be available. We will record the webinar, so you'll be able to look at it if you want to and get all the materials. So that being said, I'm looking now for any generic question regarding buildings, your interaction with the IEA. You may have questions on what types of things you could work with us on, or any question at all that relates to buildings. Please don't ask me like maybe a carbon capture and storage question, because obviously I won't be able to answer that. And I know I do know a little bit about renewable energy, but again, mostly about building technologies. So if there's anybody that's willing to, want to get engaged and talk about other issues, we'd be glad to discuss that now.
Okay, it looks like we have two hands.
Two hands raised. Okay, thank you so much. We're going to give it a test now.
Karsten, we're going to unmute you, and you can speak now.
Hi there. Yeah. First of all, I actually want to point out that mainly actually the big issues, like the big potential we have, is not really in the new building sector. It's actually renovation. We had a conference today in actually the last 3 days in Berlin, the Berlin Energy Days, which focused actually where it was actually also a big discussion, because we can actually just, for example, in Germany, catch up at about 2 to 4% when we look at new buildings, but the big mass where we have the potential for energy saving is the buildings, the existing buildings, the building stock.
So that we agree with you 100%, and we have acknowledged that. If you look at in our publications, we definitely talk about that. One of the things that I mentioned on the current work plan, the things that we're doing now, is that in our modeling, currently, I would say that we've estimated that we require at least 2% of the buildings to be renovated per year, and we know that other organizations are calling for 3%. So we want to do more modeling analysis, sensitivity analysis, not only for the rate of renovation, but the level of efficiency improvements. Now, one of the key things that we're calling for, if you look at our building envelope roadmap, which is available for free online, and hopefully many people that haven't seen it yet will go download it right after this call, is that we think the critical first step is to ensure that the current rate of renovation at 1% become deep, because the vast majority of those renovations are only modest performance for energy. And so what's critical is to get a business model in place, which could obviously be stimulated through incentives and other policies to get it going, that becomes self-sufficient for deep renovation, so that all of the 1% of buildings that are being refurbished per year are deep energy renovations. And once that becomes an established market, then we can increase the rate of 2 and 3%. But if we start, or maybe even 5% eventually, but if we just do modest renovations at 20% improvement, we now have taken the most cost-effective measures first, and any deeper renovations down the road will be less cost-effective, and in many cases will not be cost-effective at all. So we have to be very careful how we manage this. But we think this is a critical element as well, and we hope to provide much more detailed analytical capability to assess this. So, but we agree fully.
Thank you, Karsten. We have another question coming in from Charlie Sarkisian. I'm sorry if I mispronounced your last name, Charlie. I'm unmuting now if you want to ask your question.
Yes, good morning and good afternoon. I used to work with Mark for many years, so I'm calling from LBNL here. I just wanted to ask a question regarding international standards and coordination of those standards and some of the development effort that could be done through IEA. We are here in U.S. Trying to pay a little bit more attention to shading systems and attachments to windows as a retrofit option, also as a energy saving options for new buildings. Many methods to evaluate these systems or to even rate them are in development and need further work. And so one of the frustrations that we have is that through the ISO organization, There is a confusing set of standards. There are multiple standards that addresses the same issue in Windows area that has a potential to now creep into the shading system area. So my question is, what would be the best way to work through IEA to try to resolve those issues?
Okay. Hi, Charlie. How are you? I recognized your voice before you actually said it, so I knew what. So, but you bring up an excellent point. The first thing I would say is that if people do look at the building envelope roadmap, we have detailed sections on the requirements for energy performance metrics, energy performance protocols, ratings, testing. We do address this issue of multiple standards. Encouraging, I think it was about a month ago, the IEA did host a very high-level standards organization activity where we discussed this at a very high level. It didn't get to the level of Windows. And also, we basically, I think there was multiple meetings that day, so I wasn't able to participate in the entire meeting. But, the idea of having more collaboration on standards has become a higher priority than it was. It's being recognized. But the question is will member governments fund that activity? Do they realize that standardization can lead to more harmonization? I mean, harmonization can lead to better competitive markets, more innovative markets that can deliver the services. Now, in the case of Windows, we do have a unique situation where we need to harmonize that. I know the other thing that's been raised by many people is that within the ISO umbrella, the European Union has like 27, 28 votes, and Japan, China, the U.S., and let's say Canada, Korea, we have 4 or 5 votes, and along with Australia. Ironically, that within the European Union, within their own member government voting, which people tell me do not try to replicate that system because it's complicated, but they do have some type of weighted voting methodology to take into account for large countries and smaller countries. So I'm not proposing to take the same approach, but if there is issues within ISO, maybe one of the things to improve ISO is to say, okay, how do we take into account a more weighted global perspective, so that and that could be something that potentially the IEA could lead that. Now, it also comes back to resources. Right now, if we don't have the resources to lead that type of effort, anything we do is going to be limited, and like we had this workshop, which it did have some funding, but if people in the building sector are really interested in this topic, we certainly should add it to our list. So from you raising this today, I mean, I will add that to my list of things that I put in my presentation, and I'll also include it as a possible item. And then in the presentation on webinar 3, I'll lay out some of the key elements to what would need to happen for that to occur. So, but no, thanks for raising that, and I'll definitely add it. So thank you.
Okay, great. Thanks very much, Charlie. For those of you who are still on the line, we still can take some questions. You can either raise your hand or you can write them in. In the meanwhile, just as a reminder that, no, this is the same question.
Why don't you put the evaluation form? Okay, so one more thing. I know that we still have quite a few people on the line. We lost a few people, but we have the majority of the people are still with us. John's going to also put up an evaluation form that we, the Excel spreadsheet, remember? Okay. So I've given you the Excel spreadsheet in that folder. Okay. Sorry, folks. So I'm just going to bring that up unless we have any more questions. So we have an evaluation form that was sent out to every registered participant today, and please take the time to fill that out. Not only does it provide evaluation for the overall webinar activity, it also provides a place for you to provide feedback on proposed project areas, as well as to supply input on anything new that you may have, along with general feedback and questions. So, okay, there it is there. So it's an Excel spreadsheet, and does it have the pull-down menu on it? Does it? Okay, just click on one of those. So, okay, so yeah, so you just pull this down right here. So that just shows, this is just a way to collect the data, refine it real fast. So anyway, please fill out this form and send it back to us so we can get your feedback. And so do we have any other questions? Or
just Charlie,
Okay.
Charlie, do you have another question that you wanted to ask?
Oh, sorry, I didn't. I forgot to raise my to lower my hand. No, I don't.
Okay, okay. So we're working on this process, so this is good. It's great testing. Okay, well,
hold on, Mark. We still have one question that came in from Omid Saberi from the IFC World Bank, and wanted to thank you. So I think, Omid, we'll try to follow up with you to see how there's some opportunity here on the activities happening at the World Bank on this front.
okay.
So as a last note before we go to Mark's final presentation on next steps, just a reminder to everyone that you can access all of this information about today's webinar as well as the webinar tomorrow on the IEA webpage under Newsroom and Events and then Workshops. Tomorrow's webinar will be held in the morning for our Pacific audience, and we'll be looking to seek key global building stakeholders in the development of our new initiative for sustainable buildings. And with that, I'll leave it to Mark.
Yeah. Okay. And so what the other element that I sent out in my email to the registrants was that we are hosting webinar 3 and 4 in addition to tomorrow's webinar. Webinar 3, just to reiterate, we're going to go through the potential project areas. We're going to discuss those in detail, provide examples of the things that we would work on, and any input we get from today and tomorrow will go into that. And I would say that we have several organizations that have already agreed to look at the IEA presentation in advance and then provide their feedback and their reflection on what we're proposing. So if there are other organizations that would like to serve in that role, we would welcome that. Right now we have room for definitely for a few more, but it certainly won't be an unlimited list because we want to give everybody the time. And then for webinar 4, it's going to be mostly related to modeling data. I know there was a comment earlier about industry participating as the core function. So if you're an industry representative or an individual company or a trade association and you want to work with us and you want to share your data on a confidential basis, we definitely would welcome you. We also believe that when we look at data, there's many sources around the world. A lot of it is proprietary, but we believe if we work as a group and we negotiate with various entities as a team, as a global effort, we can negotiate as to which data we can get access to, and we keep that proprietary, and then which data can we actually disclose and put into the public domain without revealing any critical information that would limit their ability to sell the data. So there's lots of discussions on that, and so if you're interested in that, if you have something to offer and you'd like to present, we will certainly consider it, so you can contact me for that. But I guess I would just say, and I'll let John wrap it up finally, but I would just say thank you very much for your time. We know it's a lot of time to spend 2 hours on the phone with us today, but we certainly appreciate it, and we value your input, and we'll certainly consider it as we move forward. So thank you.
Okay, thanks very much, Mark, and thank you for all of you who attended. We're glad to see such good turnout. Would also like to thank our participants for speaking today and bringing some important information and insight to the table. And for those of you who are interested in joining tomorrow, again, the information is online. We certainly would like to have you back, both tomorrow and for webinars 3 and 4. And then finally, as Mark mentioned, we will send an evaluation form, which will be very useful for us to understand how you found this webinar as we continue to move forward with the building partnership. So with that, thank you again, and we'll be signing off.
Okay, thank you.